My introduction to gore happened when I was very young. I want to say about 7 or 8. I'd always watched scary movies as a child and heard of the infamous Faces of Death tape. This was way before the days of the internet, so this was the first time I'd ever heard of people dying on camera. Being as young as I was, I only knew I wasn't supposed to watch it, so of course I did everything in my power to get a hold of that tape. I'm somewhat of a naturally insubordinate person. I like to think that we all kind of remember that first time we actually saw IRL gore. Well, I do anyway. It happened to be a video of someone being drawn and quartered, which, to be fair, looked too fake to be real. Back in the day, public execution served as a group bonding exercise where this was the social norm. The thrill of the spectacle, how governments and leaders intentionally ritualized the process as a demonstration of political control. How the executed people were dehumanized and made into icons for their alleged crimes. Often an execution involved many steps to violate the corpse long after the death had occurred. I often wonder if we would have the same behavior if public executions happened today. Kind of hard to imagine people in history with our modern morality and sensibilities. People were more routinely exposed to pain and held a very different attitude towards human suffering than we do today. Not that we haven't stopped being fascinated by death and execution or stopped watching, but we may not do it for the same reasons as we used to. The crazy thing is that public executions were only stopped because the lack of crowd control. Later on, they practiced more humane prisoner laws. So is it in human nature to enjoy gore or violence? Nick Berg was an American freelance radio repairman who went to Iraq after the United States invasion of Iraq. I think we're all kind of familiar with him. If not, there's some really good channels that have covered it, and I recommend you go check those out if you really would like to get to the gist of it. He was abducted and beheaded on camera on a video that was released to the internet in May 2004 by terrorists. It was reportedly released and uploaded from London to a Malaysian-hosted website by the organization. In that time, Nick Berg's beheading within that day was the top search term on the internet. Within a week, it was all 10 search terms. And for the month, it was number 2 of all search terms for the month. Bestgore.com was one of the first websites to take the gore subject to the public next to Rotten.com. Established in 2008, Bestgore was the go-to site for a curious kid who heard about the website from kids at school. And it was a lot of our first exposure to this darker side of the internet. It went rather under the radar for quite some time until it gained public media attention for hosting the film of the murder of June Lin, the victim of the film One Lunatic, One Ice Pick, published to the website by the murderer Luca Magnotta. As a result, there was an investigation into the website on a federal level, which brought 1 count of corrupting morals charges that carried a maximum of 2 years in prison for the owner, Mark Merrick. Merrick is quoted as saying, "You can take the publishing of a chainsaw beheading by the Syrian rebels propaganda team, who claimed that this atrocity was committed by people behind President Bashar al-Assad. The video stirred major outrages in the ranks of the sheeple, but it didn't fool anyone on Bestgore, because we know where the video really was from. It's been on Bestgore since before the Syrian fraudulent revolution started, and we have its full version, including the original audio, and we know that it's from Mexico. It was the same for when Bestgore busted the rebels about publishing of the domestic gas leak explosion, which they also manipulated into looking like the aftermath of an alleged indiscriminate bombing by the rulers. Or one more recently, when the whole world was revving about Muslims being slaughtered by Buddhists in Burma. The propaganda fooled everyone except us on Bestgore because we recognized the lynching video from Kenya. Merrick also has said that he's received testimonies from readers stating that the images on his site had convinced them to avoid speeding, darting between traffic on motorcycles, horseplay with forklifts, even from committing suicide. and that the government itself is recognizing the utility of shocking images and has now started putting them on cigarette packaging. Powerful drug cartels are increasingly using gruesome videos of executions and interrogations to intimidate their rivals, police, and an already terrified public in Mexico's vicious drug war. The drug gangs, battling for control of lucrative smuggling routes into the United States, have long attached handwritten notes to victims they dump in public as a way to scare rival gangs and pesky state officials. As someone from Texas, I've heard of this happening where they actually have hung people and thrown them off of overpasses for the freeway to make a statement in their territories. But now, they're airing more of their dirty work and threats on blogs and websites like YouTube, and bullying Mexican media into putting their gory tapes on television for a wider play audience. While the gangs began using the bloody videos to send a message to police and rivals several years ago, they've become more and more common in recent months as turf wars escalated across the country. The format of the tapes is often the same. Captives, many bloodied from beatings, are tied up, blindfolded, and posed in front of a draped sheet in an anonymous setting. Surrounded by heavily armed captors in ski masks and guided by questions from an off-camera voice, the captives are forced to confess allegiances to cartels or corrupt officials. Many of them are murdered on camera. The most explicit videos, when detected, are usually removed by major websites like YouTube, but stay posted on narco blogs run by anonymous administrators. In one video, a man with a black eye is tethered to a chair in his underwear and appears to be strangled to death with a tourniquet by his captors. There's a letter Z scrawled across his chest for Zetas, a spin-off of the Gulf Cartel. In another video, a man is slowly beheaded with a knife. Mexico and other South American countries have a devoted media for this sort of thing, actually. Known as Nota Roja, or Nota Roja Gráfica, or La Prensa, these publications are sold on newsstands and usually have very graphic and gory photos of deaths on their front page for all to see. These are some of the best-selling newspapers in Mexico to this day. As I mentioned before, I'm not really a gore channel. I actually have a very hard time stomaching it. But if you did want to kind of get more into the gore side of things, here are two channels that I definitely recommend, as I do watch them for the commentary. If you do want to see the unedited versions, they also have opportunities to do that via their Patreon. So why do we like it? Why do we enjoy watching gore or violence on camera? Believe it or not, this is something that has actually been studied. People want to understand what the human curiosity is in regards to gore. One gore enthusiast who is unnamed is quoted as saying, "I get enjoyment from my curiosity being temporarily resolved, but I do not enjoy the images themselves. I generally cringe with disgust and feel empathy for victims, but it's hard to explain exactly what I feel. I usually have that 'that's enough' moment about an hour and a half into the videos. I may not go back for months afterwards, even years, but I always go back." It's a common misconception to wonder if something's wrong with you. Is something wrong with me because I enjoy watching this sort of content? Am I a serial killer? Do I have psychopathic tendencies? And that's actually a normal way to think. It's a normal question that a lot of people have for themselves. There's various reasons why people watch gore. Some people watch it, as the other quote said, to get their curiosity temporarily resolved. And then there's other people, like this absolute legend, Bonnie Brooks. There is no drug that could possibly make me as high and auto-orgasmic as this. I enjoy this so much, I actually have a part-time career in my retirement owning a torture museum and a collection of violent historical erotic art. I have done this for so many years, and I've yet to see any horrifying effects on me, emotionally or mentally. My ex-husband left me in a very nice position where I can fund any hobby I wished, and this is where I ended up. Is there something wrong with you? History says no. Many of us delight in such visual stimulation, as long as you don't hurt anyone in any way. Watching it on TV and on movies, reading about it, looking at pictures, just enjoy yourself and the pleasure you gain from it. I've often hoped that if I were to pass in some violent way, God forbid, but if I did, I could only hope that somehow, somewhere, someone could gain as much pleasures as I have from seeing some of the things I have. I hate to be so bold and forward, but I've seen some torture scenes, fights, and all kinds of stuff in movies and TV, and a few videos of live executions and other mayhem. It's always been extremely sexually enjoyable for me. So a series of scientists wanted to know what the long-term effects of watching gore does to the human brain. In this study, they exposed people to real-life violence, media violence, to test and see if they had any PTSD symptoms, if they showed empathy, things like that. What they discovered was when they compared brainwaves of movie gore versus IRL gore, the IRL gore seemed to trigger the PTSD symptoms, while the movie gore triggered more of an emotional response. The effects that it had on the body to people who were experiencing the real-life violence was akin to watching pornographic films. The heart racing, the somewhat enjoyment, they know that they're not supposed to be watching it but can't turn away type situations. The evidence suggests that high levels of exposure to real life and movie violence are associated with diminished emotional distress, emotional empathy, suggesting that the person who's watching this type of content on a regular basis is actually desensitizing themselves to the type of content. I can attest to this by making this short video. Having to research and look up terrible things that have happened, the first hour was cringing. The second hour, it was just images on a screen. I think I somehow tricked my brain into thinking that it wasn't real. It was just some really good Tom Savini level practical effects, and that's how my brain decided to cope with it instead of bringing on any trauma. The brain is one amazing blob of jelly, isn't it? I really hope you guys liked this video, and I hope to do more like this in the future. If there's a subject that you want to see, let me know, and I leave you with one final question. Do you think gore and violent videos are a bad thing? Have you ever watched them? If so, how do you feel about it? Let me know in the comments.